Cool. So, Toby, thank you so much for joining us on the debrief today. I'm really, really excited to have you on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So, today we're talking about basically being flexible and not taking a cookie cutter approach to incident management, and like basically why that's so important. So, just to start off, like I'd love if you could tell me about yourself, what your background is, and where or how you ended up where you are today at Future.
So I started off as a software developer, so working to write software for a fintech organization, and then started kind of transitioning towards build engineering, kind of quality control, scrum mastering, product ownership, that kind of stuff. Um, and then when I joined Future, which is now coming up 10 years, I joined the operations team predominantly to try and continue that sort of tooling effect change within developers' kind of workflows. So although I understand the value of customers and the products for those end users, I really feel aligned with the kind of DevOps culture. And so I joined the ops team, and now over the kind of 10 years, we've evolved that into what is now an SRE team. So we are working closely with our developers and supporting the reliability of services. And like crucially to this conversation, we are the kind of the principal on-call responding team, handling the incident management processes across all of Future's infrastructure, all Future's public infrastructure. And increasingly some of the kind of corporate systems and supporting some of our colleagues in other parts of our organization as well.
Gotcha. And for those who may not know, what does Future do?
Oh wow! So Future is one of those kind of companies that you won't know Future necessarily, but you'll know the brands that you interact with. So we are a media publishing, content creation sort of powerhouse. For those in the United Kingdom, you'd know us as we own Go Compare, which is an insurance comparison site, very well recognized in the UK for principally for the opera singer advertising. But we are behind brands like Tech Radar, Tom's Hardware, What Hi-Fi, Life Science, Space.com, all sorts of big brands, as well as a lot of magazine publishing and video production, all sorts of bits and pieces. So specifically for the team that I work with, we are worried mostly around our kind of public-facing systems and the magazine print systems, the ad tech systems that we've bespoked. All sorts of things. Quite a broad set of services.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. You just mentioned incident management, and obviously, that's a big part of the conversation here today. But before I ask you like what your experience is with incident management, I'd love to know just like what has it been like being part of Future for 10 years? Because I can imagine like things have changed quite a bit from like when you first joined to sort of where you are today. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you can speak to that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so Future's been around coming up 40 years. So we were the first company to stick a cassette to the front of a magazine back in the old cassette like computer days. It's floppy disk, EROMs. So it's been around a long time. When I joined the organization, there was only about 200 people. We'd gone through a lot of downsizing. Magazines weren't selling so great. We were trying to reposition ourselves, retransition ourselves. So a very small group of people, predominantly based in one location. Over the last 10 years, we've acquired uh, probably dozens of organizations of different scales. Um, and so the organization has both grown not just in people numbers, we're now about 3,500 people, but also distributed. So the SRE team, for example, is globally based from all the way over in Phoenix, right the way across to Czech and Brno. Um, but also all those technologies that we've acquired through those years haven't just been a brand, and thanks for the brand, but we've adopted core fundamental technology shifts as part of that. So when I joined, Future was based in a couple of data centers in London. Now we
Mhm.
run out of Google, Azure, Amazon, still those data centers, um, and we are trying to support all of their ecosystem. My team in particular is a good example of this, where there's only like two people who joined our organization to join SRE. Everyone else has come through an acquisition. So effectively, everyone's been acqui-hired into the team. So we've got a really broad set of technology, skill sets, context, and kind of knowledge to bring to the table for it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned incident management. I'd love if you could speak to your like experience with it. And I know that you mentioned that your team now is like the primary on-call team. So is your experience with incident management, more did it more so kick off more recently, or did you have experience before Future or throughout your time at Future?
Sure.
Yeah, if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so when I was part of the fintech org before I joined Future,
Yeah.
I was a developer, and so my instant experience there was more kind of observing. We had a very clean, very clear, explicit separation between developer and operator, for kind of various kind of PCI security reasons. So I was often supporting those who were on call and seeing the kind of challenges they had. When I joined Future, the first couple of days of working, I saw the on-call phones going off quite a lot.
Mm,
And the first 3 months, I focused on not being that when I joined that on-call rota. So I fixed and replaced a lot of the monitoring systems to reduce that. So in terms of instant kind of experience, I've had kind of high pressure. We need to fix this. We've had like whole data center outages, which effectively turned our entire product base offline. There was a massive power failure in Telecity about 5 years ago. Took out BT in London. It was a pretty big problem. So we are liaising there with multiple teams across multiple locations, trying to prioritize different product spaces to bring back online,
mhm.
all the way through to using kind of incident management as a way to manage maintenance. So we have kind of planned incidents that we just use as a way of orchestrating planned maintenance for visibility purposes, because we understand that although planned maintenance is predictable,
Yeah.
we also recognize that sometimes it doesn't work like you expect. And so having a system there that let us um, manage that was quite useful. But yeah, so everything from huge multi-region outages impacting the entire organization through to yeah, trinket web pages that we can just bumble through.
Yeah.
And we've evolved these processes over the years. At first, our incident management was really just yelling across the room and going, "Who just changed the thing? Oh, it was you. Can you change it back? Okay, we're back." Right the way through to now, where we're working. We've had some incidents that have lasted 12 plus hours. We've had to do handovers, changing instant leads to support just kind of sensible working practices and things. So yeah, quite a spectrum in my opinion.
Yeah. What is it like dealing with like a really high pressure incident? So like,
Mm.
you mentioned data centers going out. Like I can imagine that that's like very stressful. What is it like in the moment for you dealing with something like that?
I think, and I feel we'll probably touch on this a bit more as we talk, but I think it really depends on the nature of the people around you during that situation.
Yeah.
The very first on-call incident I had, the week I went on call, that first week, our principal DNS name servers failed. So every single website that we ran basically went offline because no one could get to it. And this was at 2 in the morning, Wednesday morning, and I was only just into the team, and I panicked. I had no idea what I was doing. I went to the machines, rebooted them, prayed, everything worked. It's like great. Didn't sleep very well that night. But then the next day, talking with the team, they said, "Don't come in. You were interrupted overnight." So that de-stressed. So the next time I had an incident that was really, really out of hours, I was sort of more comfortable with that, knowing that the team weren't saying, "Oh, you took too long to do this. You didn't. It was too difficult to solve because I didn't have the information." It was everyone was really supportive. And during those big incidents, the key thing is around just being able to maintain um, like a clarity of communication. There's people asking you questions around. As an instant lead during that kind of incident, it's everyone is looking to you to try and understand what's going on. When are we going to be back? What's happening? How much money are we losing? Who broke it? What happened? Oh no, what's happening now? And so the trick I've always found is every couple of minutes I kind of sit back and go, right, where are we? What are we doing? What do we know? What do we need to find out next? And then sort of loop that during that kind of major outage, because then you realize you're making progress, so you can do those kinds of updates. Um, but yeah, I think the key thing in that kind of high stress situation is having a team around you can really trust and kind of delegate and get feedback from. Um, yeah, you can arguably never have too many people in an incident if they are all working in the right kinds of directions. If it gets noisy, it's obviously too many, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on this idea of like having a supportive team more broadly in just a bit. But I can imagine that you have seen incident management take various forms, whether it's a future, previous roles, friends of yours that work in the space. What is something that you think organizations tend to get wrong with incident management? And are there any like assumptions that you find that you see organizations make that you find like particularly frustrating?
Yeah, I think what I've seen from different orgs is there's usually a kind of common thread, um, but it's the biggest challenge I've seen is where, especially now in a kind of remote first world,
Yeah.
is no one knows who or where to discuss an issue, or an issue goes it sort of chats in the background for too long, and then someone goes, "Oh, maybe we should do a thing now," and then they trigger the thing, but all that context is lost. You have to sort of repeat yourself and reanalyze things. Now there's more people coming in, and so the biggest fault I've seen with incident management is being nervous to raise them. Is sort of go in too soon is the preference for us. It's like if you think something should be an incident, just make an incident. Um, an example, we've had like tickets coming in, like BAU think, oh, my database is running a bit slow. And we start investigating it and go, no, it's a bit odd. And we make an incident. So you know what? This is disruptive. We've basically agreed as a team, like if something is disruptive from your day, you were working on something and someone has disrupted you enough to go look at this, and it's more than like 5-10 minutes of different, throw an incident out. It just doesn't matter. Like, what's the worst that could happen? You close it and you go, wasn't a thing. Doesn't matter. But the best thing that comes from that is that everyone is in that conversation right from the very beginning, or they can scroll back and see, what's been happening, and they get that context, and it might grow to become, oh goodness me, this is a much bigger problem than we first thought. Um, so the biggest frustration I've seen is when organizations and teams don't do that. It's that kind of, we'll sit in the background and quietly try and figure it out, not
Yeah.
realizing that whatever's broken for them is broken for other people, and everyone else is sharing that pain. Or the conversation happens in 5 different places. We've got a Google chat here and a Slack thread there and an email thread here, and someone's on a phone call and a video call, and everyone is talking about the same problem. And people are making decisions in each of those situations, and it's not aligned. And it's crazy. The idea that someone could say, yes, we're going to reboot that server, or yes, we're going to undeploy that thing separately, and they both happen at the same time, and everyone's like, oh no, what happened? Why did rebooting that server just undeploy that version? And why did that undeploy reboot that server? No one knows what's going on. It makes the entire recovery process so much harder.
Yeah, this is actually not the first time that I've heard someone sort of express that teams can be a little too lax in their attitude towards like just raising an incident,
Hmm.
regardless. Why do you think that is though? Like why do you think that there is that hesitation despite the fact that people are working towards fixes regardless, but they're just doing it in silos? Like
Yeah.
is it just like I don't want to be the person that adds to like this like list of work or like what is it, do you think?
Yeah. I think it can come from a couple of places. For
Yeah.
one, it's people don't like to necessarily disrupt others.
Sure.
Um, if you're again remote working, and in particular in technology where you've kind of got this idea of flow, you don't want to interrupt. It's like, no, 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 it's not a big deal. Like, I don't want to raise the alarm because it might not be a problem.
Mhm.
If you see a fire in your kitchen, like, I'm going to raise the alarm, that's definitely a problem. But if you're sort of unsure, well, maybe they already know this. Maybe they're dealing with
Mhm.
something else. Is my stuff a priority? So I think there's that. It's either that kind of almost shyness. It's like, I don't want to be. It's not a big deal. It's just this little thing. Don't worry about it. And the other one is you can kind of want to avoid raising an incident if you feel you might get blamed or you're going to be held accountable in some more negative way.
Yeah.
So you might want to be a bit sheepish about it. Again, in that kitchen example, if you're the one that's trying to cook some eggs and you suddenly set fire to the frying pan, you're going to like, do that. And you're 12 years old and your parents are like, don't cook frying pan, don't do that. And you did it. Right? You're like, no, 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 that didn't happen. You're not going to raise the alarm. You're going to hide that. You're going to try and pretend that never happened. Um,
Yeah.
and then, that's not helping anyone, because in the process of doing that, you could injure yourself. Well, you're and on a technology perspective with incident management, you trying to fix your problem may be wasting another team's time who's trying to work out why their service isn't working because they rely on yours. So all those dependencies sort of creep out. And I think so, yeah. So it's either because people don't want to be seen to be not seen to be a problem, but don't want to annoy anyone else or don't want to disrupt anyone else. And the more negative is people not wanting to be held accountable to issues or like trying to like, whoops, fix it quietly.
Yeah, yeah, which I think definitely like highlights the importance of psychological safety, which is something we'll definitely touch on in this conversation. But like we've talked for a few minutes now about incident management, sort of more very abstractly. But what does good incident management even look like? I know that that's probably another very abstract question and might be a very difficult to answer. But like in your opinion, yeah, what are we all sort of aiming towards here? Like what's good?
No incidents. No incidents is what you're aiming for. Everything to be robust and stable. And I think under that, the truth is that you want incidents to be calm and collected and uh, kind of a mature conversation. Um, Ultimately, your objective during an incident is to recover the service to the expectations of your business or your customers, and then you can focus on really fixing it. I think it's very easy to I see this a lot. Um, Something is broken and it's complex, and there's a sort of quick win that gets you like 50% of the way, but there's
Right.
a bigger solution that gets you like 100% of the way, but it's going to take like an hour and a half, and everyone focuses on the hour and a half fix because that's the fix, the big T, capital F fix. But actually, that 5 minute quick win would have got you 50% of your customers back, generating that revenue still, and gives a little bit more breathing room. So that hour and a half you can do in 2 hours, but with a bit more confidence, bit more sophistication around the checks and whatever other elements you might need. So I think good incidents are those that kind of reduce, like good incident management is one that reduces that kind of recovery time, but not necessarily reduces it for the entire user base, but just it's kind of balancing. And this is sort of the crux of this kind of idea around there is no one universal truth. Like
Yeah.
if you can prioritize enough of your customers um, within the first couple of minutes, do that, and then figure out the rest. Some of these incidents can happen over a weekend, and you could, we do this in our team. Is like, what, we can get most of it there, or like the service is running, but it's not as resilient as we would like. But
Yeah.
it's Saturday, and we are okay with taking that risk until Monday when there are more people around.
Sure.
We try and do disruptive changes during the day when people are around in the office to really tell us if it doesn't work. The idea of out of hours changes is a sort of antithesis to how we like to work, because if it's out of hours, people don't notice. And that's
Right.
kind of the point, is you want people to see it. So back to that question, I feel incident management, the goal is to manage your recovery time. And then subsequently, and this is a very important thing that's very easily missed, is that post-mortem phase, that sort of what happened and how do we stop it ever happening again? If you see the same incident over and over and over again, well, what you've got there is a problem to solve, not an incident to fix or an incident to recover from. Um, if you're watching people constantly trip on a stone, are you going to issue everyone crash helmets and put out foam mats? Are you going to go fix the stone? Like, you're going to
Yeah.
go fix the stone. So the trick there is to kind of look at it and think, not why are people tripping over the stone, but why is that stone there to trip over? And
Yeah.
that's, I think, is so easy to miss, especially in a very high stress or a um, very instant heavy environment. If you're constantly bombarded with all these different outages or different rumbles or false positives, if you're constantly, your phone's going off all the time for things that don't matter, you don't take the time to really go ahead and fix it. So the really big important thing is that feedback loop. Things will
Yeah.
break. That's just unfortunately the reality of the universe. But you can make that matter less.
I want to hone in on your first point for a second. It feels like it should just be like a universal truth and an accepted reality that like if something is broken, like aim for the fix that's going to resolve it as quickly as possible, even if it even if it's not for everyone. So like I would think that if there's something that you can do in 5 minutes that, gets half of the people online, like you said in your
Yeah,
example, like I'm going to do that. And if it's like a Saturday, I'm going to deploy that and then wait until Monday to get that other 50% back
Mhm.
online. Why do you think that that's not a thing that like everyone sees and says that like this is exactly what we're going to do every time? Like why is there hesitation
yeah,
for deploying these like, quick fixes and, you know, in an effort to get at least some people back online as
yeah.
opposed to waiting for that perfect fix that may take a weekend in some cases
Mm.
or a few hours in other cases. Meanwhile, everyone is sort of sitting around like, is this fixed yet? Is this fixed yet? Where you could have prevented that and had at least half of the people waiting around saying, is this fixed yet? Is this fixed
Yeah.
yet?
I mean, that's a great question because I think there's a lot of different motivations there. Um,
Hmm.
so I mentioned Go Compare in our organization. So we customers enter personally identifiable information, um, quite a lot of it. In order to obtain an insurance quote, you need a lot of in-depth information. There are various services that we leverage as part of that. At the end of it, we then contact a whole bunch of insurance providers to get quotes back and then show it to users. Um, so if there's an issue with some part of that process, you say, oh, I could get some of that data there, you probably want to carefully think about whether you want to make that quick change
Yeah.
because you need to understand what the implications are of that change. If we make that quick change to say a CDN provider, might we inadvertently start exposing cached customer data to different users in an unexpected way? We've seen this countless times on the internet. I think it happened with Steam. I've seen other organizations have had this challenge where caches started getting sort of polluted with other people's data. We can't allow that. Like we can't leak PII to anyone. So we will not make that decision.
Yeah.
No, we will make the decision not to do that rather. Um, so there's one motivation there. You kind of go, you know what? For legal reasons, for data protection reasons, right now, we're going to stand back and go, we are going to allow more lost revenue in the short term because long term, ICO fines, customer trust is worth that loss. We'll
Sure.
lose an hour to save the business. If we have a major outage, we would prefer to do it very carefully. Um, so it kind of this is the thing. It depends on the kind of organization you're dealing with. Other situations as well, I feel, um, when it comes to that kind of cautiousness, or why people push for the big fix, is a kind of a misunderstanding necessarily, or not misunderstanding. It's people push for the larger solution because they feel that's the only solution that's acceptable to the organization. It's like
Hmm.
50% of the business is still it's not good enough. We need 100. We need to get it back. It needs to be running. We expect 100% uptime. And actually, if you talk to anyone at senior level, they're probably like, actually, you know what? 90% is probably better than none.
Yeah.
10% is probably better than none. But during that process, people have to make this assumption. And some cases, the assumption is it must be all or nothing. Um, so in SRE, there's this world of kind of service level objectives and indicators. And the core thesis of this is that you can't have 100% uptime. Something will break somewhere. So what's good enough? What are you trying to aim for? And so it might be that with page delivery, for example, you want to go, oh, 4 nines availability.
Yeah.
And right now during this incident, we're at like 95%. Like we need to get better. But when you get to like 2 nines, like, you know what? That's close enough that over the month we'll breach our objective. But right now we can sustain 2 nines availability for about 12 hours. And that gives us enough time to do some more work. So you
Yeah.
can approach your objectives and go, you know what, we can sustain this. To use, I mean, if you're unfamiliar with SLOs and the kind of concept, you effectively imagine you've got like a finance budget, and over 30 days, you say, I'm going to spend $300 over 30 days. You go, okay, that works out about $10 a month, $10 a day. So you spend buy a Starbucks, it's five. Okay, cool. I'm still within my budget. So every day you're spending $5. But then there's a weekend and you go out and you go to the cinema, you get some popcorn, you get some other stuff, and you spend like $45 in that one day. So if you sustain that for the whole month, your budget is blown. But you can do it for one day and you can go, I'm off budget, but I'll not have that Starbucks for a couple of days, and now I'm back on budget again. So on an instant level, that's saying normally we're delivering really well. Our objective was 4 nines, we're hitting 5 nines, we've got budget to spare. We're doing so well, our availability is well above that curve. So we can have a couple of days where we dip below that line and then come back up again. And that gives you context over a whole period of time. And so that means you're able to really prioritize when you want to deal with an incident as a super high critical urgent problem to solve or not. But once again, I mean, it's going to depend on the team, it's going to depend on the product. And I think
Yeah.
this is this idea is really, it's really about understanding the product and the value that you're offering to users.
Yeah, for sure. At the end, it seems like it's all about like strategic trade-offs and like taking each situation is in as like a unique case and like yeah, to our conversation, to the point of our conversation, like you know, not approaching things as cookie cutter and giving them the sort of unique treatment that they deserve. But
Yeah.
like as I think that's a great segue to sort of the heart of our conversation. What is the issue with assuming that you can treat all incidents sort of the same kind of formulaic way?
Yeah. So the challenge, like I've been thinking around this for a while. I mean, my team were working with other parts of our organization and others around kind of instant management in general. And there are some parts that are definitely arguably universal. Um,
Sure.
the the things that I think are those universal is the sort of phases of, is it broken? So you kind of triage. Is it broken? How broken is it? We're fixing it now. We think it's up and running. Some of our customers are happier. We've really fixed it. Then you go into the what happened, and then you end up with the report to your business that says, here's what happened, and here's how we're going to deal with it. So I think there's a common flow. You know, you're not sure if your frying pan's on fire. Yep, it's on fire. Okay, I'm now putting the fire out. And then the post-mortem phase is your mum and dad coming downstairs and going, why is there black marks on the ceiling? And you go, what are you going to do to not do that again? It's like, I'm not going to burn, I'm going to set fire to the frying pan again. So there's a common flow. But within those beats, within those beat points, is where that flexibility has to exist. Incidents can span minutes, they can span days, they can span weeks. The individual prioritization and those involved will differ. So yeah, it's sort of scope for infinite variability, both based on the complexity of the applications or the services you're providing. If you're providing a kind of vertically aligned product team who are providing a service to customers, they know their service upside down, back to front. So they will have a small number of people on call. They go, yep, it's broken, we fix it, we're great. Whereas another system that's a complex connection of different services, maybe you're going to third-party vendors and back again to other third-party vendors, back again. That ecosystem is very different. The instant response process there requires a lot more coordination. And you need people who are really dedicated to that role to say, right, what's happening right now? Where do we suspect the issue may be? Let's focus on that. Let's bisect it. Right, this team A, you deal with that. Team B, you deal with that. Team C, contact vendor, find out what's happening. And you need someone that then can bridge all those different teams. That kind of happens by default with small groups because someone tends to step up or people kind of defer to the senior in the room, but it tends to just happen organically. When it's multi-team, you need someone specifically for it.
Yeah.
And then even again on another example, so just on that point around like different types of incidents and why there isn't that kind of standard way is big incidents, like mentioned earlier, the kind of data center outage. You might have a networks team working here, you have an infrastructure team working with the data centers, but you also need a communicator. Instant coordinator for us is someone that's working with the networks team, data center team, SRE teams, dev teams, trying to go right. From a technical fix the problem perspective, the coordinator is making sure we're doing things in the right order, interpreting what people are saying, being the decision holder at that time. But separately, you're going to have people knocking on the door going, are you fixed yet? When am I going to get my website back? Is there a risk? Do we need to contact the ICO? So you need someone separately who sits alongside that coordinator to do the comms out. So I see the coordinator kind of being introspective, looking at the incident, managing that incident inside, and then the communicator being extrospective. Is that a word? It is now. They are the ones doing the communications out. And there'll be different loops of communication. Technical comms goes to technical people, deep, in depth, really specific. Business level or like board level, you'll start getting a lot looser. Well, not looser, like it won't be as technical, but it will still highlight like this is the revenue impact, this is why it matters, here's what we're doing about it. And into customer information, it might become lighter. It's just like we're aware of an issue, we're dealing with it. You don't mention vendor names, you don't mention product names, you keep it very neutral. It really annoys me when I see incident reports that name vendors as the problem, because what you're really doing there is deferring your blame. You still chose that vendor and you didn't have protection in place to protect against an issue with that vendor. So that's on you, not on them. Unless they get particularly egregious and they keep failing, then maybe, but even then. So did that answer your question? I think that
Yeah,
answered
yeah,
it.
no, it definitely did. I do want to ask though, like how much of this applies to really small teams and organizations? So like you said, it's ideal that you have your sort of technical communicator, you have your, so on and so forth. You have your commander, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Um, which allows you to, have approach incidents um in a non-boilerplate,
Yeah.
non-cookie cutter way.
Yeah.
But if you have a really small organization where you have like one person or one or two people responding to incidents, it may be difficult, if not impossible, to treat incidents all that different, because you only have so many hands on deck, and you need to have this very like step one, step two, step three, step four,
Yeah.
regardless of the incident type. Like how does this translate to small organizations?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing on that is the smaller orgs will still have those kinds of roles.
Hmm.
They just don't get called out in the same way. So I mentioned when I was on call at the start of Future, there's like 300 people in the entire organization. I was on call. I was the person who dealt with it. If I needed to, I could get someone else. Like I'd phone them up and go, "Hey, can you join me on this thing?" But at that time, I would have been the communicator, the coordinator, the guy doing the work, the guy fixing it, writing the reports. Like that's my job. Um,
Sure.
so in smaller teams, you tend to just do all the work at the same time. The only reason we ever get more people involved is when it becomes basically unscalable. And it's
Yeah.
honestly, it's pretty rare for us to need separate dedicated coordinator, separate from those that are doing the on-call responding. They're in the best position. Those that are so the most success we have with incident management is when the product team that build and operate the service are those that are on call for it. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, right? And so if there's a kind of relatively minor incident, you only have like three people in an instant. One person going, "I'm fixing it," another one going, "Yep, I think you got it right," and another one just watching because they're nosy. So you don't need lots of people. Like even a Future, the number of times we've had large number of people in a channel at once, for instance. So we're using Slack, we're using Instant IO, and getting people into one Slack channel, having that conversation has really helped. One of those points I made earlier on about that distributed nature of comms. And
Yeah.
the most severe incident we had like 40 people trying to do incident management from it, and that was challenging. But we had a coordinator, so it worked out. Most of
Yeah.
the time, though, half a dozen at most, and
Yeah.
four of them are just nosy. So the process would be the same for a smaller org. And in terms of that kind of the process particularly, you will probably see those phases, that kind of triage, investigate, fix, monitor, kind of review, reflect. That'll be the same kind of thing. Um, the only difference maybe is to what is acceptable to go from fixing to monitoring. Like, are we
Yeah.
good enough now? And in a smaller team, you kind of have to take that on board yourself. You have to kind of go, is this good enough right now?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Earlier, we touched on, or I mentioned psychological safety. Tell me how that fits into this conversation.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's honestly, I think it's probably the most important aspect of this.
Yeah.
I think so. I feel if you have a team that is blameless, I'm a big proponent for kind of blameless culture. Um, we talked earlier on about why you might not raise an incident. I said the kind of
Sure.
negative aspects, maybe that you're nervous about being called out. When I joined Future, there was already a culture in place. As I mentioned, we're all located in the same location, same office in Bath in the UK. And we had this thing of fail cake. And at the time, if there was an outage caused by a deploy or a code change or a config change, whatever it may have been, um, you'd have a meeting to discuss it, sort of a post-mortem, and you'd bring cake. And I understand it came originally from a sort of darker place. It was sort of apology cake.
Mhm.
But it became more of a sort of honest, yep, it's on me. Here's a nice Victoria sponge I bought from Tesco. And people were able to kind of go, okay, you broke it, but also this cake. And so that really helped in our sort of blameless element because it kind of gave not a positive spin per se, but it made us have a conversation that was proactive and beneficial. And that blamelessness means that if you have an incident that I do a deploy, I broke some stuff, I'm not going to hide and wait for someone to notice. I'm going to try and fix it quietly. Um,
Yeah.
and so it prevents that type of lingering fire that sort of creeps up because you've taken 20 minutes to fix it and it's getting worse and worse and you're stressing out and you go, no, no, what have I done? And then you get this sunk cost fallacy. Like, I'm an hour in, I've been trying to fix this for an hour. I can't raise an incident now because they'll realize I've spent an hour trying to fix it. Oh no, goodness me, what am I going to do? And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy for the person that's trying to deal with it from just their own well-being. Um, but it also highlights like a lack of trust of everyone around as well. I think if you're not willing to say, "Yep, this is broken, please help," because you feel you're going to get like accusations thrown at you, then
Yeah.
during an incident when it really matters, you need to be able to trust each other to say, "Right, I'm going to make this change." And people need to go, "Yep, I understand why you want to do it. I understand what you're trying to do." Comes from a position of authority or an understanding of the service. I might not understand what it is specifically, but I know that you can do that change. I'm going to let you go do that. You're not having to second guess everyone. You're not needing an accountable record of every last thing that's going on. Um,
Yeah.
and it's in some organizations where you have a lot of compliance requirements for change control, for example, you may
Mhm.
still need those kind of checks and balances, but they come from a position of sort of fiscal or legal requirement. So that makes perfect
Sure.
sense. And again, the incident coordinator role is really useful in that case. One person is going to do the work, the other person is managing the paperwork. Um, but if that comes from a like protecting yourself, like I don't want to take accountability for this change because it might come back and bite me, or it's going to be in my
Yeah.
performance review, or I'm going to get called out and raked over the coals in the postmortem. You're not going to voice any opinion. You're going to sit quietly and hope someone else comes up with the wrong idea. So you might have had the perfect solution right from the very beginning. You just weren't willing to voice it in case it wasn't right, or in case someone says, "No, you're rubbish." Blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's in everyone's interest. Again, I mean, the principal thing with an incident management process is you want to reduce that mean time to recovery. Whether we measure it or whether it's just a gut feeling, go, yep, things feel better now. Um, that's the kind of goal, is to manage those incidents. And if you've got someone that quietly sits back and isn't willing to talk because of that kind of culture, then that's just gonna ruin it.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I'd love to get back to sort of this cookie cutter idea. So, how do you think teams can toe the line between like having sensible defaults that they can always fall back to and not having a bespoke process for each incident? So, like, in other words, like you want the flexibility to deal with incidents as necessary, but you don't want your processes to be completely different
Mm.
each time.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of fits into sort of like a cultural thing.
Yeah.
So the one of the ways that we try and align around some sort of consistency for incident management is we make it really transparent.
Hmm.
Um, all our instant channels are publicly available, as in within the organization. So again, I mentioned we're using Slack. Public channels with 3,500 people in them, you can join our Slack channel. We prefer that people didn't because a lot of the conversation there is deep tech, and it might be disruptive, but we don't hide it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for those within the tech groups or those in the instant kind of flow, anyone can join those channels. They can see what's happening. They can see actions happening. They can see our process, and we make it really transparent. That
Yeah.
means that when an incident happens for another part of our team, they've seen how it's worked elsewhere. So although we've
Sure.
not said you must do this, they kind of go, oh, I like that. That worked well. Oh, how did I do this? And then for instance, where we're working with new kind of departments, we in SRE kind of lean in a lot and say, hey, do you want us to manage this incident for you? I will take the incident coordinator role. You guys can do what you need to do, but we'll just be there facilitating like the tooling or facilitating like the conversation, like those beat points. Like, do
Mhm.
you think we understand the problem now? Are we now fixing it? And to them, they're like, why does it matter? Like we're just going through an incident. But we know that it matters to the stakeholders because they can go to the status page or they'll get their notification. It says, we finished working it out. We are now going to fix it. So
Sure.
you start building consistency of your practice through showcasing. So you do kind of show, not tell. Um, if you tell people how it should be, people stop asking questions. People go,
Mm,
that is how it should be. I'll just do that because the magic handbook says you must do it this way.
yeah.
Whereas if you show people how it can be done, you give a little bit more flex to it. Um, and again, with those kind of beat points, is you put a little bit of rigor where you need it. So we use those kind of static points, partly because the tooling supports it, makes it really easy for us to do that. But even if we weren't using that, we'd still have that concept. And then with the
Yeah.
postmortems and the kind of review processes, we have templates that people can use, but they don't have to use them. You can use that template as a starting point and then rewrite as you need to. Um, so there's one thing. So that's one thing by the kind of show don't tell element. We do also tell, like we have handbooks that do say this is how SRE tend to approach incidents. Like who are the roles? What are they for? Why do we bother? And
Yeah.
what is that flow? Why do we do things in some ways, or why do we think this works?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times I've seen, in particular with policies, it'll say thou shalt do X, but it doesn't really say why. Like,
Yeah.
why must I do this? What goal are we trying to solve? Because if I understand like the problem, rather than so you've given me the solution, what's the problem we're trying to solve? I might have a different solution that's more effective for my team or 2024 that gives us some of that flexibility that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford. So we do show, we do tell, and we also take people on that journey. I mentioned, I didn't. Um, so we take people on the journey by doing war games and drills and trials. If we're doing maintenance, we'll get people in some of those channels just so they can sort of observe it as well. So yeah, there's a few approaches to it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to do something where I make an assumption and you're going to tell me why that's wrong. So
Okay.
I am assuming that with low severity incidents, you can take a cookie cutter approach. And with high severity incidents, you need a bespoke approach. Tell me why that assumption is wrong.
I think that to some extent there's a truth there, but I think it, the irony is that the challenge of a cookie cutter approach with low severity says that you probably shouldn't have that low severity in the first place. Like,
Hmm.
if you've got something that's happening enough that you start putting a process in to handle that type of incident. And the assumption I've made on this is that you're talking about the same kind of failure.
Sure.
Like that step, tripping over steps. Like if you're tripping over that step, it's a low impact. Most people just go whoops and carry on their day, low impact.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but you want to be able to look at that and say, right, why are we having these low severity incidents so often? Or why do we need that process in place that people are using all the time? Maybe there's something else we can fix. And I think so I feel that the having a process really depends on how detailed and how explicit that process needs to be. Like it's all
Yeah.
about depth. You could have a 400-page policy document that explains exactly how every incident we manage, like these people must be contacted. These are the phone numbers. Here is the spreadsheet of all the availability. And these people live at this address. If you really need them, you can drive around, knock on the door and go, oh God, the website's down. You probably don't need that. You could probably get away with do an at here in the general channel and see who responds. You could, let the teams who own that product dictate those bits between those beats. So I think low severity instance and high severity instance will all share those beats, those to kind of triage, investigate, fix, monitor, etc. They'll share that flow. The gaps is where the secret lies. Is for a small incident, for low impact, low risk, long duration because you kind of don't really care. It's like, yeah, it's broken, but we can take a week to fix it. Um,
Yeah.
that's on the team, the product team that own that. They can manage it. So we talk about products, components, and services. We did it the wrong way order. Products, services, and components. So product is, let's say, Facebook. Facebook is the product. And then within Facebook, there are services that are like kind of the picture service, the comment service, the ad services. And then the components within those are like databases or they are CDNs. And so low severity incidents tend to be the kind of component level or the service level where it's like small blast radius, small number of affected people, small team that understand it completely. They can kind of own their process. They do what they need to do. When you
Yeah.
get to higher criticality, then you're dealing with product level incidents. And then you need like coordination, you need synchronization and things like this. So you probably need to some extent more guidance about how you can approach a high severity incident like that than you would for low. Um, but when you've got a massive incident, by their very nature,
Yeah.
incidents are sort of unpredictable. You don't really know what's going to be broken or which teams need to be involved or whose products are going to be impacted. Sure, we had a data center outage, okay, but maybe we'll have a cloud outage. Maybe we'll have a networking only outage. Maybe we'll have an application that gets deployed and causes all sort of ripple effects. And
Yeah.
it's actually a sort of a service issue, but it's really wide spanning. So the art form of this is having the kind of like kind of the kitchen cupboard. I've got all these different spices and ingredients that I can just kind of grab and throw together to make my fantastic, unique, never to be repeated chili. But I know the general shape of a chili. I know the kind of things I'd normally throw in. And if I don't have paprika, I'll like, maybe I'll just use chili flakes and maybe some barbecue sauce I found. That's probably the same. You can improvise, but everyone knows we're making chili. So you
Yeah.
need that alignment. Again, coordinator roles for big incidents really help with that. It's like, right,
Yeah.
where is our priority? What are we focusing on?
You mentioned beat points as a way to sort of make sure that you're at least being consistent with that flow, and then, like you said, the spaces in between are where you can sort of take a more sort of custom approach. Um, how, in your opinion, like how can teams make sure that they're being consistent with these beat points, not only within their teams but across the organization?
Yeah, so I mean, tooling is probably the biggest thing there.
Yeah.
If you've got kind of universal app you can rely on. Obviously, this is the Instant IO podcast, so we're using Instant IO, and it solves that element. It makes it really easy to have that workflow. But it isn't the only thing you need. Like PagerDuty, OpsGenie, kind of status pages, they all have this idea of working, not working, investigating. They'll have statuses, and so whatever tooling and whatever kind of conventions people are using, just use those same words. I talked earlier about the kind of show not tell. Yep. If you keep using major incident, major incident, major incident, people go, I know what that means. You say
Yeah.
investigating or triage, people go, oh, I kind of know what that means. I think try and avoid being too clever in the phrasing as well. It's very easy to try and use clever, fancy words when you just mean fixing. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we're in a remediation phase. What? You're fixing it. Yeah, you're fixing it. Great. Yeah, we're observing the situation, monitoring. Grand. You don't need to be clever. Because during an incident, if it's a high stress situation, you just need to be sensible. Um, but also, you've got space to communicate. You don't have to rely just on those beat points. When you transition from those beat points, you can say, we are now fixing it. We think we've identified it. We're not entirely sure just yet. We might need to do a little bit more checks as we go on. So even within there, there's flex. But the advantage of having that, building that consistent language, and again with that transparency, showing everyone this is the flow we have. Here's the docs that we use. If you want to be inspired by it, please do. You build up a common vocabulary for the entire
Mhm.
organization to communicate to each other. We have an interesting situation because of all these acquisitions. Some of our team refer to critical incidents as the most important. Another team refers to them as major incidents. And it's like the
Mm,
problem is we have critical and major, and then major and minor. And it's like, well, which one is the most important, and
Yeah.
then how do we map that into our technology? Because once it goes from humans, it then needs to become implemented. So that you've got monitoring, alerting, and like, well, this is a critical incident. But their systems will say it's a major incident, and then their systems will say that's just yeah. So alignment there is tough.